despite a dollar moving off of linear TV, the dollar is not getting reinvested in streaming. And if they cut, it's only about 25 cents getting reinvested. There's this mismatch. We're starting to then see streaming overall kind of start to plateau off.
You're listening to Media Monitor, where we break down what's happening in the media and the advertising industry and tell you what it actually means. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Hey, Kelly. It's going all right. Friday. It's exciting going into the weekend. How about you?
I love a Friday. And in fact, 1 week ago Friday, it was the 6-year anniversary of COVID being announced, which coincidentally was on a Friday the 13th as well.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those like silly things, but yeah, we're 6 years out of it, and
That's
I thought
crazy.
it was
That's crazy
6
that it's
years.
6 years. Yeah. I still have
And
like masks, like leftover masks, like sitting in my car. It's like my entire glove compartment is like just masks.
we all do.
It's wild.
Yeah, but one of the things that you and I talked about this week was the inflection point that happened with TV during COVID. And so based on that and based on some of the research you've been doing, I thought it would be a great week to talk TV.
Yeah. Who doesn't love talking TV? But yeah, always down to talk TV, past, current, and future.
Yeah. And, I think it's one of those things that everybody kind of knows what the trend is, but we're not talking about it explicitly. We're not saying, who's cutting cords and how, I mean, you hear about it a little bit in the news, but the data is really interesting and the trends are worth discussing in full. Today, let's talk about what 2025 TV trends looked like. Let's talk about where things are going for 2026 and just, maybe some ideas that you have around it and what people should be looking out for.
Yeah. So kind of at the top of the pod, I'll just reference that a lot of the data here we're going to talk about is the US, but we've actually done similar TV analyses for the UK back kind of end of last year, as well as Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And I'll tell you right now that the trends are remarkably identical, right? This like shift off of TV, moving into cord cutting, different ways to consume media, fragmentation across streamers, right? It's a similar pain point that broadcasters are having everywhere. It's not unique to the US, but because we kind of did a presentation recently for just US clients, we'll kind of highlight the US stuff here, but I want to kind of like talk about that at the top of the call. But maybe we'll start with like the inflection point of like how this started to transpire. So like if you go back to, let's call it like 2017, roughly, 65% of US households had some sort of cable subscription. So, you're talking at that time, about 30% of people had some sort of streaming. Again, these aren't mutually exclusive, right? Like for a long time, my household, streamed Netflix and had Hulu, but we also had a cable subscription. So it's not.
And that was probably one of the first ones,
For
right?
sure.
If people are dabbling. They're like, yes, of course we have cable, but maybe we have Netflix too.
And you look at it too, and you're like, early days of Hulu and Netflix, there just wasn't a lot to consume either, right? It wasn't until like Netflix started to do their own investment in shows and people were like, wow, maybe we should kind of tune in. And Hulu really started to be like almost like a affiliate broadcast network kind of, and then showing shows there. So like for a while, there just wasn't a lot to stream. But as to your point for the inflection point is right, as people were told to work from home, were home, didn't have a place to go, is pretty much when the market broke, which again, shouldn't be a surprise, but it was at that point where literally the amount of households that streamed their content versus the amount of households that consumed their content on cable or like a satellite TV literally flipped. So it was 2020 in which it was roughly like a 50-50 split. And ever since then, kind of streaming continues to grow every single year, whereas TV kind of continues to kind of slowly be on the outs. And if you fast forward to today, roughly about 83% of households stream some sort of content, whereas only about, let's call it like 36%-ish view some sort of like cable or set top box type consumption, and that has kind of been the trend now for a couple of years. So there was this massive shift.
So in a 10-year period, we saw a inversion
the
of
old flippy floppy
allocation. Wow.
Yeah. And what's
so Oh, bud.
No, I was just gonna say, like, what I think is like a fun fact is we can kind of dig in and take a look at like how much ad revenue is going to new shows or repeats or live sports, or right the myriad of ways we can slice and dice the data. What's really interesting is if you hone in, it was clear that the folks that owned cable networks saw what was coming. And you actually see this huge spike around new TV shows that happens in 2020 and 2021, where like there's actually a spike where let's call it around 15% of shows at any point were new prior to that. It actually goes up to like 17% in those time periods. But when it was clear that more people were cutting cable, it kind of immediately reverses course. So by 2022 onward, it continues just to kind of claw away. And when we get to 2025, only 10% of overall revenue on cable is going into new shows. The rest is all going into repeats. And the example that, we talk about, which I love, is I didn't even realize that they were still filming new seasons of Ridiculousness until I saw a note saying they're canceling Ridiculousness. But like if you look at like MTV and you go to your like cable channel, like what's on kind of preview station, their menu, it's like 6 hours of Ridiculousness. Like it's just literally one block after another. Like Tuesday is just 6 hours repeats of Ridiculousness. And again, it's not necessarily like chicken and egg, but like there is some element where it's connected, where like there's less enticing to kind of like tune in. And so I need to find something new to watch, something novel to watch. And that's
Mhm.
why part of the migration happened to things like streaming, because there just wasn't as much investment in kind of new shows. And again, it was clear that they kind of tried to come roaring back and try, but it was probably too little too late.
Yeah. Wow. I also didn't know that Ridiculousness was still on the air.
Yeah, and it came as a shock to me that it was like still filming, but good on them. Shout out to Rob. I love that show. Robin Big was also one of my faves. So different era.
Right. So, when it comes to TV, what are some of the tailwinds, headwinds? Like, talk a little bit about what's driving, any sort of gains, if there are, and what's pushing the declines.
Yeah, I think probably something that has been talked about and talked about again and talked about still, live sports.
Right.
It's still very much like, and in many ways it's become synonymous. Like you look at TV, and live sports kind of continues to be what TV is. And so like that is probably an element of it. If you strip out the World Cup and Olympics this year, live sports is probably going to be 40% of overall linear TV revenue, which is wild to consider. Yeah, so in 2017, live sports was only 19% of total linear revenue. So like how they made money, how it was being run, etc., only 19. You fast forward to probably by the end of this year, you're at 40%. Um,
Wow. So it's more than doubled.
it's more than doubled. And what's wild is when you look at like the end of the year in terms of like Nielsen's top 10 shows in terms of consumption on TV, it's like Sunday Night Football, NBA, all of these things where like usually there's some sort of like Chicago Fire in the mix is all kind of part of it. But yeah, it's this massive shift into live sports, which again makes sense because it's a combination of like it's live. So I have
Mhm.
to tune in at a specific time. I can't kind of like there's no fun in watching a game from 3 days ago. Like you already know what happened. People have talked about it. You got to know now what's happening. It's also unfolding in real time, right? It's not like some sort of
Right.
like scripted show. So there's that element that keeps people tuned in. And also from like a content perspective, I can have, some talking heads, do some wraparound content for not a lot of money, and then kind of extend the viewing experience on broadcast and get people to tune in and watch the stuff before and after. So from like a broadcaster perspective, a publisher, they can kind of make even more money around that without just the live sport, without a whole lot of investment, as opposed to like a scripted show where each
Mhm.
episode is costing a heck of a lot more to kind of do that on the wraparound. So like part of it is that for sure. And then part of it is also just kind of figuring out that this is one of the last places that still lands. So it's interesting how much that has become part of the fabric of linear TV.
Now, when it comes to who is still advertising on TV, who are these people, advertisers, and who's stopping,
Yeah.
and going elsewhere?
Yeah, so I would say like this is not a doom and gloom. Everybody's abandoning it. When we drilled into our data, I mean, to be fair, is around we cover about 100-ish of these like subcategories. Think like detergents and laundry is one example. About 2/3 cut their linear budgets in 2025, which is the highest it's ever been since COVID. So there is that element, but there are some where there's still very much a value. Where my head goes to is restaurants.
Hmm.
Restaurants love running on linear TV still, particularly around live sports. A lot of it is this whole like we've got to drive foot traffic, we've got to get people interested. But they do a lot of these like limited time offerings, LTOs, where they'll say, hey, only for the next month, if you come to a restaurant, you can get X. Like we
Right.
live in a fairly small town. There's not a lot of people that live here. We have one McDonald's and probably like a 25-mile radius. They did this whole like Grinch promotion where they launched an adult Happy Meal and you got a pair of Grinch socks. There was Grinch fries. It was like a pickling thing. You kind of sprinkle on the French fries themselves. It sold out in our small town in I think 2 hours. Like I had showed up and I didn't even know that they were doing this promotion, and I was like, oh, this looks fun. I'll get one. I got it, and apparently they sold out like 10 cars past me. And again, part of that is like you got this limited window. You want people to get excited about it. TV still reaches a lot of people in a very short amount of time. So you run that ad and now you're like, everyone go out and get their Grinch socks. It still works, right? It helps drive revenue. It didn't help me in particular. I didn't see the ad. So like discount me. But like that's a place where there's still some investment because it kind of works. That's a big one. Finance, like financial categories, particularly around
Hmm.
like credit cards, payment type apps, still is a big driver of spend on linear and continues to be holding decently well in terms of trends. So I would say there's definitely some bright spots, despite certainly some negatives and declines. But there's categories, advertisers that still value it for sure.
Anything worth noting on categories that have walked away from linear advertising?
Yeah, big one in my head is pharmaceuticals. I feel
Right.
like just like live sports had been synonymous with TV, so was every 5 minutes being told, you'll take this drug, you might get better, but there's also a whole lot of ways you could get worse. What's fascinating is it worked really well for TV, right? You got this 90-second spot. It kind of worked in terms of format. The audiences were maybe a little bit older, so they were like prime pharmaceutical type age. But we saw a massive pullback in Q4 of last year. And so it was a pretty stunning reversal. When you look at TV's overall kind of portfolio, back in, again, we'll reference that 2017 number. Pharmaceutical ad spend was roughly 9% of the overall TV market. You fast forward
Hmm.
to 2025, even with the declines, it was 14% of overall revenue. So they've kind of had invested for a long time while others had pulled back. So they were both growing in a shrinking pool, and it really accelerated for them. So it was a big deal in TV. But again, I would highlight some pretty shocking reversals that we saw happen kind of late Q3 into Q4, where I'm guessing that that's going to be something that is actually going to continue rather than be like a blip. And that's a big kind of watch out for TV for the next year or so.
Yeah. So I guess on the flip side of that, on the streaming side of the house, who's growing the most in that capacity?
Yeah. So what's really interesting on streaming is twofold. Is one, despite a dollar moving off of linear TV, the dollar is not getting reinvested in streaming. You would think, hey, I can watch Below Deck on Bravo, or I could watch it on Peacock. I could watch Abbott Elementary on ABC, or I could watch Abbott Elementary on Hulu. But in reality, that dollar is not flowing. And if they cut from Abbott Elementary, if they cut from Below Deck, it's only about 25 cents that's actually getting reinvested back onto that same show on streaming. Part of it is a pricing parity. There's a million different reasons that we could probably get into in a whole separate episode. But part of it is that streaming's growth is happening, but it's not happening as fast as the declines are on linear. And so there's this mismatch that's happening, and we're starting to then see streaming overall kind of start to plateau off and kind of smooth out over the last couple of years, where it used to be 18-20% growth. Last year I think it probably came in at around 9 for our data, which is a pretty fast deceleration. And even further still, all of that was driven by programmatic enablement on streaming. So it's a big deal. And I don't know if you saw, but there was a couple articles out over the weekend that Nielsen actually didn't publish their gauge for March because they saw that streaming actually declined and they had to like recheck their data. So it doesn't bode incredibly well for the near term. But it is still something that is growing ever so slightly.
Got it. So $4 walks out of linear, $1 comes in
It's a different
to
way of saying it. Yes,
streaming. It's declining. Programmatic is, I think you said this in a recent pod, it's, projected to reach half of the dollars in 2026.
for sure.
Wow. So other, predictions for 2026 as it relates to these dynamics.
Yeah, I'll leave it with one thought because I don't want it to kind of come off as like a TV hater or like doom and gloom for the whole medium. What I would say is like even discounting the tentpole type stuff that's going to probably drive a lot of revenue for this year, I do think that there's kind of a few things to worth kind of discussing, exploring as it relates to the dynamics of the industry. The thing
Mhm.
that really comes to the top of my mind is looking at subscription prices. For me, a lot of what happened with cord cutting was like one, it was like a function of uh, some cool new content, a fun way to kind of binge as opposed to like waiting for something to come on TV. That was all kind of a really cool, novel idea. But what's really fascinating is it was also an economic one. Back in 2019, 2020, I would pay probably on average like 100 $110 for my cable subscription. The very basic was like 50. I could subscribe to 5 streaming services and still be at $32. And at the time there wasn't really a lot of like ad options, right? So like $32 also got me a lot of platforms that I saw no ads. I just showed up and I watched content when I wanted, how I wanted. Like that's a pretty crazy thing. Um that has changed. The economics has fundamentally changed. Like, I'm sure everyone listening has experienced this in terms of like seeing the rate increases. Hey, you could also get ads, but even the ad tiers now are more expensive than the top tiers were 5, 6 years ago. So the differentiation is like cable has only edged up ever so slightly, and it's about $120 now for your average cable bundle for a month. But streaming for just 5 services, and again, like that's not even going to get you all the sports you want. It's not going to get you all the content you want. Is around like $80, $85. And if you add in
Yeah.
then like, hey, I really love sports, so I need to see all of the sports. I love the NFL. You're actually then looking at probably a subscription north of like $111. So like from a cord cutting perspective, it's just not the incentive that it used to be. And then also there's also the ease. As much as it's difficult to kind of work with a cable company, I only have to work with one and I get all of that content. If I wanted all the other stuff, I've got to work with like 5 to 7 companies, then like manage my subscriptions, figure out what's going on, install different apps, right? Like there's a complication to it that like in many ways was the reason why people migrated, like the opposite of why people migrated to that 6 years
Totally.
ago, 7 years ago.
First of all, my dad is very tech savvy and he's usually educating me. But, he spent his career working in cable. And as a result of that, never had to pay for cable.
So it's
And
great.
so when he retired, he had to make these decisions. And he was, we had this discussion the other day about where to go, what to do. There's probably a term out there for this that exists, but if there isn't, we need to come up with that one around this cycling of subscription services where people are willing to pay for one, then turn it off, pay for and then move to the next one. And so he
Yep.
said to me, you know what, I'm just going to have to be okay with not knowing what happens this season in the pit, because I'm not, I'm over here and I'm not going to be over there until a few months from now. And so
Yeah.
his biggest thing right now is figuring out where he's going to watch San Francisco Giants games. But, that wasn't a problem before because
No,
an antenna could actually get you quite a bit.
good.
Uh, and, those rabbit ears, people forget.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I think a lot of people also existed post rabbit ears. Not to kind of like say how old we are, but yes, like there were options to just you spend 5 minutes kind of jiggling them, slapping some aluminum foil on it to improve the signal for sure. But I don't know if you knew this, they do offer HD antennas that if you live within about 20 miles of a broadcast tower, you should effectively still get the broadcasters for free. It's a bit harder to do. We tried it. We're just outside of the radius of the local broadcast tower, so we get none of those.
Yeah.
Because years back, we ran into a problem where we wanted to watch the Olympics. At the time, we had cord cut. Peacock wasn't streaming it yet, So we ended up going to a local Chili's and watching, like, we would like look at the schedule and be like, all right, what games do we want to go see? Let's run over to Chili's for half an hour and watch what we want. That has changed since now. But yeah, back then it was, we cord cut maybe a little too soon.
Yeah, and I guess there's even like some devices. I was reading this New York Times article of ways you can get free TV. I'm not gonna find the name for it, but like you can actually get like
Yeah.
a little like device that you plug into your phone, and there you go. Well, as always, Sean, this was a good one.
Yeah. It's been real. I hope you have a great weekend, and till next week.
Can't wait. I'm gonna watch some good TV over the weekend and fill you in on it next week, and then we can
Can't wait
we
to
can
hear
talk
about it.
where I watched it.
Yeah. Always a plus. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
That's Media Monitor. Follow us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts every Wednesday for a new episode. And as always, thanks for listening.